I'm setting up my little show for today. This will take me here just one second, but while I'm doing that, I would like someone to, if they are willing to, share about any exercises or anything relating to what we've been talking about in this little 5-day workshop. If they tried anything yesterday that was helpful or useful that they might want to talk about. I'm just curious if anybody tried a mindfulness exercise yesterday that was helpful in some way. No one. All right.
Meg and Julia both have a hand up.
Oh, I can't say it. Julia, why don't you tell us what happened?
Hello.
Oh, there you are, Julia.
Let's see. Well, actually, technically, I did twice yesterday, but there's one time where Mr. Jeff told me to do it because 2 other people were in the room, and I was internally like shaking. You know, like that's super nervous, like your organs are shaking. You're like, oh, I don't know how to move anymore. Like I've forgotten everything I know. So
Yes.
we did it a couple times, and it calmed me down. It made me more focused too. So I was like, oh, thank you.
Nice. Isn't it nice to have a little tool like that that you can use to make things better? Yeah.
Which one did you all use? I'm curious. The breathing?
The thing that we learned yesterday where we're like more aware of the body.
Stop. That's awesome. Very cool. Who else had their hand up? Thank you, Julia. That's awesome. Meg, and then it says Colleen down there, but I don't think that's Colleen.
Gray. Yeah, Gray.
Great. All right, Meg, what'd you try?
So I was practicing my recital pieces for my solo recital, and before I did my concerto, I just did the one with your mood, your thoughts, and your posture.
Yeah.
And that really helped.
The stop exercise. That is awesome. And then who is the person at the bottom again?
Gray.
Gray. Oh, there you go. Okay, it says Gray and Colleen now. Gray, did you have your hand up?
Yes.
Cool. What did you try?
Yesterday, before we did violin, I did some breaths. I stopped, I took a breath, I observed my feeling, and then we proceeded.
Yeah. Did it help?
Yes, it helped a lot.
Look at this. It's a miracle. Yeah, that's really great to hear. And something that you can remember, one thing that I do to help remember these is I actually have little Post-its. And I just put the exercise on a Post-it on my stand. Sometimes it just kind of reminds me that I have options. Because, when you start practicing, you kind of forget, right? You go into habits that you've been doing for a long time. And just having the little Post-it there just kind of reminds, oh yeah, stop. Oh yeah, body scan. And sometimes I just do these during the day. Actually, this morning as I was driving, I don't like getting up early in the morning, and I didn't have any coffee this morning. And that's like a 5-stage emergency right there. And so I was a little cranky, and I got in my car, and I was like, I gotta go to the grocery store. That means I have to put my shoes on. I don't want to do that. And I could just feel really simply feel myself starting to get, like, oh, what? And then I just checked in, scanned my body. I'm like, yeah, this is silly. I just have to get coffee. That's probably not a big deal, right? And it made my morning a lot easier and a lot better. So just remember, these are easy exercises. They don't have to take long, but they're very, very helpful to interrupt any kind of negative pattern that you might have. And I encourage you to remind yourself to do it. It's really helpful. When I taught high school, I used to teach high school orchestra. I taught public school orchestra for about 10 years before I went to become a college teacher. And I used to have these signs up on the wall. So in my orchestra room, there was a sign that said stop. And there was another one that said breathe. And when I saw people sort of getting freaked out, I would just point. And we would all do it together. I would do it with my students. And I used to think, oh, they're not getting anything out of it. And one day I just decided to stop doing them because I didn't know. And I remember it took about 2 days, and they were like, Mr. Diaz, are we going to do the cool exercises again? Because I'm a mess. Oh, so STOP is an acronym. It means stop, take deep breaths, observe, and proceed with intention. So the stop part is just literally stopping. The T is taking the deep breaths. The O means observe your feelings, your moods, and your thoughts. And then proceed with intention is the part where we say, is that a useful thought? Is that a useful situation to be in right now? Can I let it go and move on to something else? All right, cool. So today we're going to talk about something very, very important, especially during situations like what we have right now, where people are, you know, everybody knows we're in the middle of a pandemic, and it's very hard to communicate with each other, spend the kind of social time we used to have. Things are not easy for a lot of people. And so one thing that can happen to folks when things like that happen, including you and your parents and your friends and your partners, is that we can get pretty sad about what's going on and anxious and even a little bit depressed about it. And one of the reasons, other than the fact that it's hard, is that we can be kind of hard on ourselves. Like, you know, we can say things should be better and they're not, and that's my fault. Or, you know, I should be practicing 7 hours a day, but maybe I can't anymore because, by the way, don't practice 7 hours. It's going to hurt. You're going to fall apart. Somebody told me that when I was young. I wish I would have listened to them. But, you know, we can be really hard on ourselves. So what I'd like to do today is talk a little bit about mindful self-compassion. And the way we're going to do it, I need you to take out a sheet of paper and a pencil, or if you have a computer nearby and you want to sort of score it this way, we're going to take a little quiz this morning, okay? And you're going to have to do a little bit of math. So if you're not good at division, have somebody nearby that can help you divide. But this quiz is a little quiz that I developed for my musicians. It's a very short quiz. And it is based off the research of a woman named Kristen Neff. And Kristen Neff is a professor at the University of Texas, Austin. And she focuses on something called self-compassion. And she looks at how self-compassion affects people. So what happens when you're just a little kinder to yourself? Does that change your anxiety and depression? Does that change your ability to deal with mistakes, which is really important for musicians? And does it change whether you treat other people well or not? And so it's a really interesting little research. Well, it's not, it's a big research project. And I took one of her questionnaires that she uses to sort of figure out where people are on this self-compassion scale, and I adapted it for musicians. So we're going to take that quiz this morning, and I'm going to ask you some questions, and you're going to give yourself a score. So let me just pull that up on my handy dandy PowerPoint. Sarah, can you make me a co-host? Thank you. Okay, let me. Got it. All right. And you guys see that? Music and self-compassion? All right. Are you ready? Okay. So let me move this. So look at the numbers on top. They're going to change. Okay. Sometimes 3 will be never, and sometimes 1 will be never. So you have to look. In this case, I'm asking the question, after making a mistake, do you feel like you will never be a good enough musician? So after making a mistake, do you ever have that thought of, oh, I'm just never going to be a good enough musician? If you never have that thought, write down a 3. If you're like, that never happens to me. But if you sometimes have that thought, write a 2. And if you're one of those people that always thinks that, so anytime you make a mistake, you're always like, oh, I'm just never going to be good enough, go ahead and write a 1. Okay? You just got to write 1 and then go to the next line. Did everybody get that one? Yeah. Okay, let's move on. It's 10 questions. So the question is, do you ever feel like other musicians probably struggle less than you do with practicing and performing? So sometimes you think, you know what? I'm struggling, but everybody else is probably just fine. I'm the one that's having the most amount of problems, right? Do you ever get those kind of thoughts? If you do, right, write a 1. If you're like, oh, I always think that other people have it easier than me. But if you don't, if you're like, that never happens, write a 3. And then if it happens to you sometimes, write a 2. Other musicians struggle less than you do. Okay. I'm going to try to make the grid here so I can see all of you. There we go. Can I move on? Great. All right. Question 3. Do you forgive yourself for making musical mistakes? So if you never forgive yourself, you're always like, oh, write a 1. But if you're always pretty forgiving, you're like, I can forgive myself for making that mistake, write a 3. If you sometimes forgive yourself, write a 2. Okay, moving on. Do you stay calm and collected during frustrating musical situations? If your answer is never, I get really frustrated when the situation isn't working the way it should. Write a 1. If you're always like, yep, this is a frustrating situation, but I'm handling it pretty well, I think I'm okay, write a 3. And if you're kind of in the middle, write a 2. Okie dokie. Let's go to the next one. Oh, did I already ask this one? Feel like other musicians probably less than you. Wait a minute. Let's see. We'll skip that one. Divide by 9. I don't know what happened there. Okay, let's go to this one. Accept that frustration is just part of being a musician. So do you just kind of accept that idea that, you know what? Being a musician just means sometimes we get frustrated, right? So if you accept that idea, say, yeah, always. Yeah, that's pretty much what my thought process is. But if you're always like, oh, I just have a hard time dealing with my own frustration. So, you know, it's hard for me to deal with the idea that frustration is part of being a musician, then write 1. And then if you're in between, write a 2. Do you ever start obsessing over what you're doing wrong instead of what you're doing right? You ever get in those practice sessions where you're like, oh, I know I did 50 things wrong, and I'm obsessing about my mistakes. So if you always do that, if that's like just how you are, can you write a 1? And if you never do that, well, you're like, I had some good things here too. That's great. Write a 3. And then if you're somewhere in between, write a 2. All right. Next question. Dun, dun, dun. Do you ever stop to remind yourself that practicing and performing is probably hard for everyone, not just you? Do you ever like stop and say, you know what? It's probably hard for everyone. It's not just me. It's hard for everyone. And yes, some of these questions are similar because they're trying to get to the same idea in different ways, right? So if you remind yourself that practicing and performing is probably hard for everyone, write 3, if that's a common thing for you. And if it's not, write 1. All right. Do you treat yourself with kindness after a bad practice or session or performance? So you've had a really bad session or performance and you're like, yeah, I'm going to treat myself with kindness. I probably shouldn't beat myself up too much. If that's the case, write a 3. If you happen to be in between, sometimes you do, sometimes you don't, write a 2. And if you're like, I'm always mean to myself after I've had a bad practice or performance. All right. Do you keep a good perspective about making mistakes during practice and performance? In other words, what's a good perspective? Probably a good perspective is like, yeah, that's pretty normal. I'm going to fix it. Or do you go, the world is ending. Nothing will ever be the same. I am an abject failure at life, right? So 1 is never, 3 is always. Okay, so I think did you end up with 9 questions? Is that right? Instead of 10? Great, sorry. So divide by 9. So add up all those numbers and then divide by 9 and then write down your score. And then what I like to do, if people want to, we could either do this in the chat or we can do it by show of hands. Depends on how much you want to disclose about yourself. Seeing that, you know, we're all friends here. We all struggle. Okay. Okay. So if we have some scores, and you might end up, you're going to end up with some decimal points, right? So that means you're somewhere on that scale. That's okay. Who wants to volunteer? Who had like pretty healthy self-compassion, like around the 3? You're like, yeah, I'm pretty good. Anybody score around high twos, like 2.8, 2.9, 2 or 3? Well, okay. Yeah, you're all overachievers. That's pretty clear. How many of you were around the 2? Like somewhere in the middle? Okay, good. All right. And how many of you were like, ooh, I'm a little hard on myself, around the 1s? Anybody want to admit that? Any 1s? Okay. All right. Yeah. Oh, 2 points out. I'm seeing all the scores. Okay. Not terrible. Not terrible. Now, I want to remind you that this is the reason we are this way. So there's really 2 ways to look at it. Some of us are just predisposed, which is a really fancy word in psychology to say, you know, we're kind of, this is the way we're built, right? Not everybody is like, all the time, right? Some of us just kind of are, you know, like Eeyore. You guys want, you like Winnie the Pooh? You know how Eeyore is just, there's nothing you can do. Eeyore is just going to be pretty upset and about just about anything, right? And you know, Pooh and everybody else help him out, but they love him. It's just who he is, right? But sometimes they're a little worried about Pooh. Some of us are basically Eeyores. That's just how we are. Oh, we're just not good at things. And then some of us are, you know, a little bit more Tigger, right? You know, Tigger has fantastic self-esteem. Actually, Rabbit probably has the best self-esteem in Winnie the Pooh. You know, he's not concerned with anything. So we all range in that. So that's one way. The other thing is that we sort of learn to think this way from if we've had teachers or parents that tell us to think this way, right? Because they were raised a particular way. So none of this is about judgment. It's about knowing what your tendencies are, right? But we do know that if, I'm going to show you something that's really important, the higher your score are, so in other words, people who score higher on these scales have the following. So higher self-compassion. So if you were closer to a 3, people who have high self-compassion are less afraid of failure. So they tend to take more risks, right? Which in being a musician, you need to take some risks, right? You have to be able to just say, hey, I'm going to give this a shot, right? And so it's an important characteristic to have. They feel less depression and anxiety in general. People with high levels of self-compassion, as you can imagine, feel a little less anxious and depressed, right? They just have that, unless there's some biological reason that they're depressed or anxious, and that's very hard to do, you know, fix otherwise. And here's one of my favorites, and one of the reasons I like to teach self-compassion is that people who are self-compassionate tend to be kinder and more forgiving of others, right? Now, I really, really believe as a musician that it's really, really important that we spend our whole lives playing together. Musicians know each other forever. Once you play music with somebody, you will likely run into them again at some point. You will remember them. You'll probably make music with them again. And so it's really, really important to treat each other with kindness. Right? Remembering that we're all in this together. This is a beautiful art form, and that we're very privileged to get to make music and share it with other people, right? So I like to think that one of the most important things about being a musician is being kind and forgiving of others, especially in musical settings. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share a little meditation with you. It is by Christian Neff. It is called the Self-Compassion Exercise. It takes 5 minutes, and all you need to do is listen and close your eyes and just kind of sit. And then we'll talk about it afterwards. And I use this meditation with my students, especially during hard times. So after the pandemic hit last year, March, gosh, it hasn't even been a year. Once the pandemic hit in March, we used to do these like once a week in my classes. It was just kind of a way to check in, okay? So let me pull that up for you. Let me share my screen. Let's see. 1 second here. Okay. So I'm going to reset this.
This practice is called the self-compassion break.
Can you hear
it's
it?
something you can do anytime during the day or at night when you need a little self-compassion. So to practice this exercise, we actually need to call up a little suffering. So I'd invite you to think about a situation in your life right now that is difficult for you. Maybe you're feeling stress, or you're having a relationship problem, or you're worried about something that might happen. I'd invite you to think of something that is difficult, but not overwhelmingly difficult, especially if you're new to practicing the self-compassion break. So finding a situation and getting in touch with it. What's going on? What happened? Or what might happen? Who said what? Really bring the situation to life in your mind's eye. And then I'm going to be saying a series of phrases that are designed to help us remember the three components of self-compassion when we need it most. So the first phrase is, this is a moment of suffering, right? We're bringing mindful awareness to the fact that suffering is present. And I'd invite you to find some language that speaks to you. Something like, this is really hard right now. Or, I'm really struggling. We're actually turning toward our difficulty, acknowledging it, naming it. This is a moment of suffering. The second phrase is, suffering is a part of life. Okay, we're reminding ourselves of our common humanity. Suffering is a part of life. And again, finding language that speaks to you. It may be something like, it's not abnormal to feel this way. Many people are going through similar situations. Right? The degree of suffering may be different, the flavor of suffering may be different, but suffering is a part of life, part of being human. And then the third phrase is, may I be kind to myself in this moment. And to support bringing kindness to yourself, I'd invite you to perhaps put your hands over your heart or some other place on your body that feels soothing and comforting. Feeling the warmth of your hands, the gentle touch. Letting those feelings of care stream through your fingers. May I be kind to myself. And using any language that supports that sense of kindness. Perhaps language you would use with a good friend you cared about who was going through a very similar situation. You know, it may be something like, I'm here for you. It's going to be okay. I care about you. You can even try using a diminutive if that feels comfortable. You know, oh, darling, I'm so sorry. Or you can try calling yourself by your first name. Anything that feels natural to express your deep wish that you be well and happy and free from suffering.
Okay. What was that like? Sometimes people have very interesting reactions to that meditation, especially if we're not used to telling ourselves nice things. How many of you felt different after doing that? Anybody feel a little different? Yeah, a few of you did. Yeah, cool. Yeah, especially if you're hard on yourself. It's sometimes good to remind ourselves of these things, right? So what are the three components in that? One is you say, this is hard, right? So you can do this while you're practicing sometimes. If you're really feeling frustrated, instead of ignoring that you're feeling frustrated, you can just stop and say, yeah, this is hard. I'm not feeling good right now, right? This is not a good situation. And the second thing is stopping to say what? Well, this is normal, right? And in mindfulness, we make things normal. We don't say they're good or bad necessarily. We just say it's part of it, right? This is just part of life. Sometimes things are going really well and sometimes they're not, right? So just acknowledging that things don't have to go well all the time is really, really important, right? And then the last one is to say, I wish myself well, right? Yeah. You give yourself like just a moment to say, yeah, I'm wishing myself well, right? And that's really important because it is really hard to be kind to other people if we are not kind to ourselves. It's hard to be forgiving, right? And one thing I really love about that particular exercise is that when I have trouble being nice to myself, I imagine what it might be like to tell a good friend, right? So I think, okay, well, maybe I have a hard time being nice to myself right now, but what if I had a friend who was here saying, hey, Frank, I'm not feeling so good. I'm having a hard day. What would I tell them? What is it that I would tell them? Well, I wouldn't say, well, suck it up. All right. That's not how I'm built. Although I was told to suck it up my whole life. So I've gotten a little bit better at that. I would say, hey, it's going to be okay, or I'm here for you. Right. And so you try to turn that and use that self-talk. And we do know from evidence that these meditations, remember that your mind uses imagination and talk to sort of communicate with itself. So when you talk to yourself in this way, your mind believes on some level that it's somebody else talking to it, right? It operates on a very interesting sort of subliminal level for a lot of people. And what it does is it makes people over time, people who try these meditation exercises, self-compassion, really changes them. In some studies they've done, just taking a 5 to 10 minute self-compassion break 2 to 3 times a week changes that score that you guys had to a much higher score within just 2 to 3 weeks for a lot of people, right? And some people use it in therapy and other situations. So, okay, we've got 2 minutes left together. I've had a ball this week working with you. I wish we could have done it in person. I like going to Louisville. It's a cool place, and I've got friends in that area. So maybe one day.
Yeah, next year.
Yeah.
We'll have you fun.
But before we go, any questions or comments? We have 1 minute. Anything you're dying to know about mindfulness that I haven't had a chance to cover this week? Oh, who's that? That is, okay, hold on 1 second. Your names don't show up when I'm, oh, Mag, go ahead, Mag.
What if you just forget them?
I do. I forget them all the time. That's why I put them on a little Post-it. But here's what I'll do. I will give Sarah a copy of all of my little PowerPoints with all that stuff on it. And then she will just have those and she can send them to you and you can check them out anytime. Okay, I'll put those together over the weekend for you. Absolutely.
And we'll also have the recordings too that you can watch.
Yay.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. Anything else? All right. Well, be well, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon of recording. Thank you for spending time with me this week. Thank you, Sarah, for inviting me to do this with your studio and all the nice folks involved. And again, I hope these exercises are helpful to you and that you're happy and joyful making music and making other people's lives better through music as well. Right. See you later.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.